The Nyari had not known death for 60,000 years. Their biological renaissance, as they called it, had freed them from the cruel cycle of birth and decay that plagued lesser species. Senior architect Tahoe stood at the observation deck of the exploration vessel Endless Dawn *, his silver eyes fixed on a holographic display of a small blue planet. "Another life-bearing world," said Navigator Jiwoo, her voice carrying the measured calm of someone who had witnessed the birth and death of stars. "But this one has achieved technological advancement." Tahoe nodded. "The third such species we've encountered in this galactic arm. Their electromagnetic transmissions suggest a curious preoccupation with time." The data scrolled before them, human lifespans ranging from mere decades to barely a century. The Nyari explorers exchanged puzzled glances. How could any species achieve anything of value when their existence was so fleeting? "They're like mayflies," Tahoe mused, "born, reproducing, and dying in what would be a mere moment to us. Yet they've mastered nuclear fission within 10,000 years of developing agriculture," Jiwoo noted. "That's unprecedented. The Eternal Council would want to know more about these humans. Perhaps they might make interesting specimens for the archives of transient species, those civilizations that flared brilliantly before inevitably burning out." Tahoe moved his long, silver fingers across the control panel, zooming in on the blue planet's largest landmasses. The screen filled with images of human cities, their structures reaching toward the sky in a frantic, disorganized pattern that seemed to reflect their hurried existence. "Look at how quickly they build," he said. "No thought for beauty or lasting harmony. Only function and speed." Jiwoo stepped closer. "I see something different. Look there." She pointed to landmarks, grand structures built centuries ago that still stood. "They create knowing they will never see the distant future of their works. There is something noble in that." Tahoe made a sound that might have been a laugh. In his 4,000 years, he had seen many species come and go. None had impressed him enough to change the fundamental Nyari view. Immortality was the ultimate evolutionary achievement. "The Council will send a research team," he decided. "I will recommend minimal contact. Their short lives make them unpredictable." But Science Officer Minho, who had been quietly analyzing the data streams, spoke up. "Their biological makeup is fascinating. Their cells are programmed to die, yet they fight against this limit with remarkable ingenuity. Their medical advances in just the last century suggest they might one day solve their mortality problem." "All species hope to defeat death," Tahoe dismissed. "None succeed." "We did," Jiwoo reminded him. "After millions of years of evolution," Tahoe said. "These humans are infants. They will be gone before they take their first true steps." The ship's sensors chimed, indicating a new data packet had been intercepted from Earth. Minho's eyes widened as he reviewed it. "They've detected us," he said with surprise. "Their primitive sensors shouldn't have that capability." Tahoe frowned. This was unexpected. By Nyari calculations, humanity should be at least 2 centuries away from developing technology that could detect their cloaked vessels. "Put it on screen," he ordered. The holographic display shifted to show a grainy image of their own ship, captured by what appeared to be a simple orbital telescope. Below the image was a message, broadcast on multiple frequencies in several Earth languages. "To the visitors observing our world," Jiwoo translated, "we extend greetings and welcome. Please respond if you receive this message." The 3 Nyari stood in silence. Protocol for underdeveloped species was clear. Observe, document, and avoid contact until they reached appropriate technological maturity, typically defined as successful colonization of their own star system. "They are forward," Minho noted with what might have been admiration. "They are presumptuous," Tahoe corrected. "The Council will not approve of contact." But as they watched, more data flooded in. Earth's scientists were already theorizing about the ship's propulsion system with surprising accuracy. Military vessels were being deployed to higher orbits. Communication systems worldwide were focusing on their location. For such a brief-lived species, they move with remarkable haste, Ju observed. Tahoe considered the situation. The standard observation mission had become complicated. If they left now, the humans would know they had been watched and might develop hostile attitudes toward future contact. If they stayed, protocol demanded they remain silent despite being detected. He made a decision that would later be marked as the first deviation from standard Nairi procedure in over 500 years. Prepare a response message, he told Ju. Simple greeting only. No technological data, no mention of our nature. Minho looked shocked. The council will be informed after the fact. Tahoe finished. These humans have surprised us once. I wish to understand how before we depart. 3 days later, the Eternal Council received Tahoe's full report. His decision to respond had opened a limited dialogue with Earth's united scientific community. The humans had reacted not with fear, but with overwhelming enthusiasm and curiosity. They asked questions no young species should think to ask, Tahoe reported. About time, consciousness, the nature of reality itself. Their philosophers posed problems our own took millennia to consider. Council Elder Sanghun's expression remained impassive. You believe there is something exceptional about these humans. I believe they are worth studying more closely, Tahoe replied carefully. Their brief lives give them perspective we may have lost. Perspective, another elder questioned. Urgency, Tahoe clarified. They see problems and solve them immediately because they cannot afford to wait. While we might spend a century contemplating the perfect solution, they implement an imperfect one and improve it 10 times over in the same period. The council chambers fell silent as the elders communicated in the subtle way of those who had known each other for thousands of years. A slight shift in posture, a minimal change in expression. Finally, Elder Sanghun spoke. We will send a formal contact mission. You, Architect Tayo, will lead it. Learn what you can from these brief-lived humans. Perhaps there is wisdom in their haste that our eternal patience has caused us to forget. As Tahoe bowed and departed, he wondered what the humans would think when they learned the truth about the Nairi. Would they envy their immortality? Or would they pity them for existing without the drive that comes from knowing time is limited? For the first time in centuries, Tahoe found himself genuinely curious about the answer. Dr. Minji Park couldn't stop staring at the alien delegate. Ambassador Hyunki of the Nairi stood nearly 7 feet tall, his silvery skin reflecting the conference room lights with a subtle iridescence. According to their own history, he was over 4,000 years old. We welcome Earth into the greater galactic community, Hyunki said, his perfect English delivered without emotion. Your species has accomplished much despite your temporal constraints. President Torres nodded diplomatically. We're eager to learn from your civilization, Ambassador. The first months of cultural exchange proved challenging. The Nairi moved with deliberate slowness, taking weeks to consider proposals that human diplomats expected to resolve in hours. They seemed perpetually amused by humanity's charming haste. In her laboratory at the International Xenobiology Institute, Dr. Park scrutinized Nairi cellular samples. Their regenerative properties were unlike anything in Earth's biological history. Cells that never reached their half-life limit, telomeres that never shortened. They don't age at all, she told her research partner, Dr. Chunho Lee. But look at these neural patterns. They're incredibly stable, too stable. Is that significant? Juno asked. Minji frowned. In human brains, neural plasticity, the ability to form new connections, is essential for learning and adaptation. The Nairi brain shows almost none. She pushed back from her microscope and rubbed her tired eyes. For 6 weeks, she had been studying the same samples, searching for answers about these immortal visitors. The United Nations had granted her lab special access to Nairi biological data as part of the scientific exchange program. It's like their brains are set in stone, she continued. Once they learn something, the pattern is fixed forever, but creating new patterns seems almost impossible. Juno moved to the digital display showing the neural scans. Could this explain why they take so long to make decisions? They're literally unable to think outside their established patterns. Minji nodded slowly. I think immortality came with a price they don't even recognize. The next day, Minji attended a cultural exchange meeting at the newly established Nyari embassy. The building itself reflected their nature, constructed from materials meant to last millennia, with no consideration for the surrounding architecture. Inside, everything moved at the Nyari pace. The meeting scheduled for 10 o'clock a.m. did not actually begin until nearly noon, as Ambassador Hyunki saw no reason to rush. Dr. Park, he acknowledged her with a slight nod when she was finally admitted to his presence. Your research request is most unusual. Minji tried to hide her frustration at having waited 2 hours. Thank you for considering it, Ambassador. I believe studying how Nyari brains process new information could help us understand each other better. We have studied human brains extensively, Hyunki replied. They are chaotic, inefficient, constantly rewiring themselves in ways that seem random. That chaos is how we adapt, Minji explained. It's why we've advanced so quickly. Hyunki's silver eyes regarded her with what might have been curiosity, though his face showed little expression. A curious theory. It will be considered by our science council. How long will that take? Minji asked. Perhaps a year. Maybe 2. Proper consideration requires time. Minji couldn't hide her disappointment. Ambassador, with respect, I'll be approaching retirement by then. For the first time, Hyunki's face showed genuine surprise. You joke, surely. You are young for your species. I'm 43. In 30 years, I'll be considered elderly. In 50, I'll likely be dead. A silence fell between them. The concept seemed to trouble the ambassador. So brief, he finally said. Yet you humans accomplish so much. It is puzzling. Later that week, Minji was surprised to receive an unexpected visitor at her lab. Jinsu, a junior Nyari scientist, arrived without warning. Ambassador Hyunki sent me, he explained. Your comment about your lifespan has created much discussion among our delegation. Unlike the other Nyari, Jinsu seemed younger somehow, though Minji knew he was over 600 years old. The ambassador has authorized me to participate in your brain study, Jinsu continued. I am considered unconventional among my people. They believe I may be more compatible with human research methods. Over the next few weeks, Minji discovered that Jinsu was indeed different from other Nyari. He asked questions, showed genuine curiosity, and could make decisions without endless deliberation. The neural scans revealed why. His brain patterns showed significantly more plasticity than other Nyari. You're an anomaly among your people, Minji told him one evening as they reviewed data. Your brain can still form new connections easily. Jinsu's expression shifted slightly. What passed for embarrassment among the Nyari? It is considered a defect. The elders call it neuroreversion and view it as primitive. In Nyari society, wisdom comes from unchanging certainty. But without change, how do you learn? How do you adapt to new situations? We rarely face truly new situations, Jinsu explained. When you live for thousands of years, patterns repeat. What seems unique to you has happened before in some form to us. Minji shook her head. That can't always be true. Meeting humans must have been new. It was, Jinsu admitted, and our response has been problematic. The council has spent 6 months debating how to proceed with relations when they should have been building connections. Is that why you came to help me? Minji asked. You saw something they couldn't. Jinsu was quiet for a long moment. I believe immortality has costs my people no longer recognize. We have traded adaptability for permanence, but your species, you burn so brightly precisely because your time is limited. Their conversation was interrupted by an alert on Minji's phone. Breaking news. Protests had erupted outside the Nyari embassy. A group called Humans First was demanding access to immortality technology. claiming the Nairi were withholding it. This was inevitable, Jinsu said, his voice tinged with what might have been sadness. Every species we contact eventually demands immortality. None understand its true nature. Minji looked at the neural scans again, seeing them with new clarity. It's not just about living forever, is it? It fundamentally changes how you think, how you perceive reality. Yes, Jinsu agreed. After 1,000 years, time loses meaning. After 2,000, so does urgency. After 3, innovation becomes increasingly rare. We perfect what we know rather than seeking what we don't. As they watched the protests grow on the newsfeed, Minji realized the true challenge of this first contact. It wasn't about technology exchange or diplomatic relations. It was about two species with fundamentally different relationships to time trying to understand each other. "We need to help people understand," she said finally. "Immortality isn't just about living forever. It's about becoming something completely different than human." Jinsu's silver eyes met hers. "And perhaps my people need to remember what we've lost in our endless journey. The fire that burns briefly also burns the brightest." They returned to their work, the human scientist and the immortal anomaly, each seeking to bridge an evolutionary gap that seemed almost impossible to cross. Outside, the world continued to react to the presence of immortals among them, with wonder, fear, envy, and hope, unaware that immortality itself might be both a gift and a prison. The joint human-Nairi outpost on Proxima Centauri faced catastrophe when its atmospheric regulators failed. Commander Do-Hyun Kim watched in frustration as the Nairi contingent debated the proper response protocol while oxygen levels steadily declined. With respect, he interrupted their deliberation. "We don't have 3 days to reach consensus. We need action now." Senior Coordinator Taeho blinked slowly. "Hasty decisions lead to errors. Our experience spans millennia." "And in those millennia, how many actual crises have you faced?" Do-Hyun challenged. The human engineering team had already implemented a temporary solution before the Nairi completed their discussion. Later, as the situation stabilized, Taeho approached Commander Kim. "Your species operates with remarkable urgency," he observed. "When you might die at any moment, you learn not to waste time," Do-Hyun replied. Meanwhile, Dr. Park's research revealed something startling. The Nairi's immortality came at a tremendous evolutionary cost. Their neural pathways became increasingly fixed over time, making them progressively more resistant to new ideas or adaptation. "They can't change," she explained to the UN Science Council. "Their immortality has trapped them in psychological amber." The emergency alarms had stopped, but Commander Kim's heart was still racing. The temporary oxygen filtration system his team had rigged was working, but it wouldn't last more than 2 weeks. By then, they needed a permanent solution. He found engineer Subin at her workstation, hands deep in circuitry. "How bad is it?" he asked. Subin didn't look up. "The main regulator core is completely fried. The backup systems failed because they were never designed to handle the radiation levels during the solar flare. We need a complete rebuild." "Can we do it with our current supplies?" "No, we need parts from Earth." Do-Hyun sighed. The next supply ship wasn't due for 3 months. "What about the Nairi?" "Their ship has advanced technology." "I already asked. They're considering our request." Subin's frustration was clear. "They don't seem to understand that we're running out of time." Across the outpost, in what the humans called the slow room, the Nairi delegation continued their methodical discussion. 5 of them sat in a perfect circle, their silver eyes occasionally blinking in unison. Taeho, the eldest at 4,221 years, spoke with measured precision. "The humans have implemented a temporary solution without proper analysis. It is inefficient and potentially dangerous." "They had no choice," said Jinsu, the youngest Nairi on the expedition. At only 612 years, he was considered barely an adult. Their bodies require consistent oxygen levels. Their haste is concerning, another Nairi commented. They've modified critical systems without proper authorization, because they would have died waiting for it, Jinsu replied. He had spent more time with humans than any other Nairi, and had developed what his elders considered disturbing habits, like interrupting. Taiho regarded him with the patience one might show a child. Death is their natural state. We must not judge their actions by our standards. Or perhaps we should, Jinsu challenged. Their mortality gives them advantages we've lost. The statement created a ripple of discomfort among the Nairi. Such ideas bordered on heresy. Back on Earth, Dr. Minji Park presented her findings to the United Nations Science Council. The room was filled with the world's top scientists and government officials. The Nairi brain is a marvel of stability, she explained, pointing to the neural imaging on the screen. Their memories are perfect, their knowledge retention absolute. But this comes at a cost. She switched to a comparison of human and Nairi brain activity when presented with novel problems. The human brain lit up with activity across multiple regions. The Nairi brain showed minimal response. They literally cannot think outside their established neural pathways, she continued. The longer they live, the more fixed these pathways become. By the time a Nairi reaches 3,000 years old, their capacity to form new neural connections is almost zero. Are you saying they can't learn? Asked a councilman. They can accumulate knowledge, but they struggle to integrate it in new ways. Innovation, creativity, quick adaptation. These are increasingly difficult for them. An official from the military leaned forward. Is this a weakness we could exploit? Minji frowned. That kind of thinking is exactly what we must avoid. This isn't about advantage or weakness. It's about understanding a fundamental difference between our species. At the Proxima outpost, a week had passed. The temporary oxygen system was failing faster than expected. Commander Kim called an emergency meeting with both human and Nairi personnel. We have 7 days before oxygen levels become critical, he stated bluntly. We need to combine human and Nairi technology to build a new regulator system. Taiho looked troubled. Such integration has never been attempted. The compatibility issues will have to be solved as we work, Do-hyun interrupted. We don't have time for perfect solutions. After much discussion, a compromise was reached. The humans would begin construction immediately, while the Nairi would calculate the optimal configurations. Jinsu volunteered to serve as the bridge between the two teams. As they worked, Jinsu observed something fascinating. The humans made mistakes, many of them, but recovered quickly and learned from each failure. The Nairi made few errors but struggled when theoretical models didn't match reality. You're going to burn out that coupling, Jinsu warned Subin as she connected two incompatible systems. Probably, she agreed, not stopping her work. But it'll give us about 6 hours of function before it fails. That's 6 hours to figure out a better solution. But why implement a flawed design? Subin looked up, hands still working. Because a flawed solution that keeps us alive is better than a perfect solution that comes too late. The concept troubled Jinsu deeply. It challenged thousands of years of Nairi thinking. On the 3rd day, the integrated system failed catastrophically, filling a section of the outpost with smoke. No one was hurt, but precious time was lost. This validates our concerns, Taiho told Commander Kim. Hasty implementation leads to failure. To everyone's surprise, Kim smiled. Actually, it told us exactly what doesn't work, which narrows down what might. We're closer to a solution now. The human team immediately began a redesign. This time, they incorporated what they'd learned from the failure. By the 5th day, they had a working prototype. It wasn't elegant or efficient by Nairi standards, but it processed oxygen. As the humans celebrated, Jinsu observed Taiho standing alone, watching them. They succeeded where our approach would have failed, Jinsu said quietly, joining his elder. For now, Taiho replied. But their solution will require constant maintenance and modification. It lacks the perfection of Nairi engineering. Perhaps perfection isn't always the goal. Jinsu hesitated before adding, I've been thinking about Dr. Park's research, about our neural rigidity. Tahoe's expression hardened, a human theory based on limited understanding. But what if she's right? What if immortality has cost us the ability to truly adapt? These humans saved themselves through rapid innovation while we were still analyzing the problem. Tahoe was silent for a long moment. Finally, he said, I have lived for over 4,000 years, Jinsu. I have seen civilizations rise and fall. The human way is brilliant but unsustainable. They burn too brightly. And perhaps we barely burn at all anymore, Jinsu replied. Their conversation was interrupted by Commander Kim, who approached with a small bottle in hand. We're having a small celebration, he told them. I'd be honored if you join us. In that moment, watching the humans celebrate their imperfect victory over death, Tahoe felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries, doubt about the Nairi path. These brief-lived creatures had succeeded through methods his people had abandoned millennia ago. Their mortality drove them to create, adapt, and overcome in ways the Nairi had forgotten. It was a troubling revelation, one that would soon spread throughout the Nairi civilization and challenge the very foundation of their immortal existence. When the Proxima pathogen emerged, it struck both species in different ways. Humans suffered respiratory distress, but could be treated with antivirals. The Nairi, however, found their regenerative systems corrupted. For the first time in 60 millennia, they faced mortality. The pathogen exploits the very stability of your cellular structure, Dr. Park explained to Ambassador Kyunki, whose once silvery skin had dulled to gray. Your inability to mutate, the very thing that grants your immortality, prevents you from developing resistance, while your species' constant cellular death and replacement allows for adaptation, Hyunki concluded. Ironic. In the quarantine zone, Dr. Park worked alongside Nairi biologist Suman to develop a treatment. Humans recovered naturally within weeks, their immune systems adapting through countless generations of cells. The Nairi continued to deteriorate. We were so certain our path was superior, Suman confessed, her voice weakening. We watched countless species rise and fall, believing ourselves above nature's cycle. Evolution isn't about perfection, Minji replied gently. It's about adaptation. The quarantine facility on Luna Base had not been designed to house Nairi patients. The silver-skinned beings required different atmospheric conditions, and their tall frames didn't fit standard medical beds. But the emergency had forced improvisation. Now 57 Nairi lay in hastily modified chambers, their once perfect bodies showing signs of decay. Dr. Minji Park hadn't slept properly in days. Dark circles framed her eyes as she studied tissue samples from Ambassador Kyunki. Under the microscope, the once perfect cells showed signs of degradation never before seen in Nairi biology. The pathogen is rewriting their cellular structure, she explained to the emergency response team. It's turning their regenerative ability against them. General Wano frowned. How did this happen? The Nairi claim they've never experienced disease in 60,000 years. That's exactly the problem, Minji said. Their immune systems have had no reason to evolve. They've been static for millennia, while microbes continue to adapt. A young aide raised her hand. But how did the pathogen cross species? It shouldn't be able to infect both humans and Nairi. It didn't evolve naturally, Suman said, her voice weak but clear. The Nairi biologist had insisted on working despite her own infection. The pathogen bears markers of artificial engineering. Silence fell over the room. The implications were clear. Someone had created this pathogen specifically to target both species. In another wing of the facility, Jinsu sat beside Tahoe's bed. The elder Nairi's silver skin had faded to ashen gray, with patches turning almost black where cellular death had begun. The Eternal Council is in disarray, Jinsu reported. Many elders refuse to believe this is happening. They claim the reports are exaggerated. Tahoe's eyes, once bright silver, had clouded. They cannot comprehend our mortality because their minds lack the flexibility to accept new realities. He paused, his breathing labored. I was like them until recently. Dr. Park believes she can develop a treatment, Chinsu said, trying to sound hopeful. The humans are sharing all their immunological research. Even if she succeeds, the Nairi will never be the same, Tahoe whispered. We have confronted what we thought impossible, our own end. In the main laboratory, Minji and Suman worked side by side. Despite her weakening condition, the Nairi scientist's knowledge proved invaluable. Her 400 years of biological research experience gave her insights no human could match. Your cells fight back by dying, Suman observed, watching human tissue samples under a microscope. When infected cells detect the pathogen, they self-destruct to prevent its spread. Apoptosis, Minji nodded. Programmed cell death. It's one of our basic defense mechanisms. We lost that ability, Suman said. Nairi cells are programmed for eternal renewal, not strategic surrender. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent call. 3 more Nairi had entered critical condition, their bodies beginning to shut down as the pathogen overwhelmed their regenerative systems. As Minji rushed to help, she passed a window overlooking the human ward. Most patients were already recovering, their bodies naturally fighting off the infection. A few had died, mostly elderly or those with compromised immune systems, but the majority would survive. The contrast was stark. Humanity's weakness, their mortality, had become their greatest strength. That night, working through exhaustion, Minji had a breakthrough. She hurried to Suman's bedside, where the Nairi scientist was now confined. Your cellular structure is too perfect, Minji explained, displaying data on her tablet. The pathogen exploits that perfection. But what if we introduced controlled imperfection? Suman's eyes widened with understanding. You want to reintroduce cellular death into our biology. Controlled cell death, Minji corrected. Your cells would retain most of their regenerative properties, but gain the ability to sacrifice themselves when infected. It would mean the end of true immortality, Suman said quietly. But the beginning of adaptability, Minji countered. Your species could survive this pathogen and any future threats. The treatment was experimental and dangerous. It required rewriting fundamental aspects of Nairi biology, introducing controlled mortality into a species that had evolved beyond death. Ambassador Hyunki, as the highest-ranking Nairi on Earth, made the decision. Proceed with the treatment, he told Minji. Starting with me. The procedure was painful. Hyunki's body fought against the changes as Minji's serum triggered genetic alterations. For hours, he convulsed as cellular death, something his body had never experienced, began occurring throughout his system. Outside the treatment chamber, General Wano received troubling news. We've identified the source of the pathogen, his intelligence officer reported. It originated from a human facility. Terrorists? Wano asked. Scientists, a group called Evolutionary Balance, believed the Nairi represented a threat to natural order. They created the pathogen as a correction. Wano's face darkened. Have they been apprehended? Yes, sir. But they claim they've released other engineered pathogens targeting the Nairi. They believe immortality is an evolutionary dead end that threatens all life. Inside the treatment chamber, Hyunki finally stabilized. His skin remained gray, but the blackened areas had stopped spreading. Minji's readings showed the pathogen receding as newly programmed cell death eliminated infected tissue. It's working, she told Suman, who watched from her bed. His body is learning to fight back. By accepting death, Suman murmured. Over the next week, all infected Nairi received the treatment. Most survived, though none emerged unchanged. Their perfect silver skin now bore patterns of gray and white, physical manifestations of their altered biology. When Hyunki finally rose from his bed, he looked at his reflection in a metal surface. The perfect being who had arrived on Earth was gone, replaced by someone marked by experience and change. We had forgotten what it means to adapt, he told Minji. For 60,000 years, we believed we had reached evolutionary perfection. Now we understand there is no perfection, only change. As news of the treatment spread to the Nairi homeworlds, their civilization faced an unprecedented crisis of identity. Some rejected the treatment, preferring to risk death rather than surrender immortality. Others embraced the change, seeing in humanity a reminder of what they had lost. In the recovery ward, Taeho spoke with Jinsu. "I have lived over 4,000 years believing our path was superior," the elder said. "Now I wonder if we have been standing still while the universe moved forward. Perhaps that's why we needed to meet humans," Jinsu suggested, "to remember what it means to evolve." Outside their window, Earth shone blue against the blackness of space, home to a species whose greatest weakness had proven to be their greatest strength, and whose brief, bright lives had forever changed the immortal Nairi. The solution, when it came, required sacrifice. Dr. Park's treatment would save the Nairi, but permanently alter their biology. They would retain exceptional longevity, perhaps several thousand years, but true immortality would be beyond them. In exchange, she explained to the Eternal Council, "Your neural pathways will regain plasticity. You'll be able to form new connections, adapt to new circumstances, and evolve once again." The council chambers erupted in chaos. Some Nairi declared they would rather face extinction than mortality. Others saw the wisdom in adaptation. Elder Taeho, once so certain of Nairi superiority, was among the first to receive the treatment. "We called ourselves the Eternal Ones," he said afterward, never realizing that eternity is not a gift but a trap. Within decades, the transformed Nairi civilization experienced a renaissance of art, science, and philosophy. They began to understand the human drive to create meaning within finite time. At the centennial celebration of First Contact, Ambassador Suman, who had chosen the treatment and survival, addressed the United Nations. "Humans taught us what we had forgotten. That life draws its value not from endless duration, but from change and growth. You showed us that mortality is not a weakness, but the crucible in which purpose is forged. For this wisdom, we are forever in your debt." As humanity and the Nairi ventured outward together, they carried this truth to the stars. Immortality without change is merely existence, while a life embracing growth, even with its inevitable end, is truly living. The Eternal Council gathered in their ancient chamber on the Nairi homeworld. 64 silver-skinned elders sat in concentric circles, many appearing as living statues, so still they seemed not to breathe. At the center stood Dr. Minji Park, her dark hair now streaked with gray, her face showing the subtle marks of her 50 years. "This human claims we must surrender our immortality," Elder Eugen said, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. "That we must welcome death into our perfect biology." "Not death," Minji corrected gently. "Change, the ability to adapt." The holographic display above showed the molecular structure of her proposed treatment. It would alter the fundamental Nairi cellular regeneration process, introducing limited cellular death while maintaining extended longevity. "The Proxima pathogen was only the beginning," she continued. "Analysis shows it was engineered using principles that can be replicated. Other pathogens will follow, targeting your unchanging biology. So we are to become like humans?" Another elder asked, disgust evident in his tone. "Brief flames that burn out in mere centuries." Taeho, still recovering from his illness, rose slowly to his feet. His once perfect silver skin now bore patches of gray and white, scars from his battle with the pathogen. "I have lived 4,000 years, he told his fellow elders. "In that time, I witnessed the rise and fall of countless species. I believed our immortality made us superior, the pinnacle of evolution." He moved toward the center of the chamber, each step deliberate. "I was wrong. The pathogen revealed our weakness. We cannot adapt because we stopped evolving. Our perfect, unchanging bodies became prisons for our minds. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. For a Nyari elder to admit error was unprecedented. Suman, still weak but determined to participate, added, "I studied Dr. Park's treatment. It doesn't just restore our ability to fight disease. It reawakens neural plasticity, our ability to form new thoughts, to change our minds. And this is desirable." Elder Eugen challenged. Uncertainty, doubt, the chaos of constant change. It is the essence of life itself, Minji answered, not just to exist, but to grow. The debate lasted for weeks, lightning fast by Nyari standards. While they deliberated, reports arrived from across Nyari space. New variations of the pathogen had appeared on 3 colony worlds. The threat was spreading. Finally, the council reached its decision. The treatment would be offered to all Nyari, but not mandated. Each individual would choose between traditional immortality with its increasing rigidity, or the new path of extended life with adaptation. The division was immediate and profound. Nearly a third of the Nyari, mostly the youngest, accepted the treatment. Another third, including many elders, rejected it completely, retreating to isolated worlds where they hoped to maintain their unchanging existence. The remaining third delayed their decision, watching to see the results. Tahoe was among the first to receive the full treatment. The process took months as his body's cellular structure was gradually altered. When it was complete, he looked at himself in a reflective surface. Gray patterns marked his once silver skin, and fine lines had appeared around his eyes. The first signs of aging he had ever experienced. "How do you feel?" Minji asked him. Tahoe was quiet for a moment. "Different. My thoughts move in new directions. Ideas I dismissed for centuries now seem worth considering." He touched the lines on his face. "Is this how humans feel all the time? This sense of urgency?" "The awareness of time passing gives everything meaning," she said. "When something can end, it becomes precious." 5 years later, the changes among the treated Nyari became impossible to ignore. They moved faster, spoke more directly, and began creating art and music unlike anything in their ancient culture. They formed new communities, built structures that prioritized innovation over permanence, and began actively collaborating with humans on scientific projects. Jinsu, who had enthusiastically embraced the treatment, established the first Nyari Human Research Institute on Mars. "We have thousands of years of knowledge," he explained at the opening ceremony. "Humans have the creativity to apply it in ways we never imagined. Together, we are more than either species alone." Not all welcomed these changes. The traditionalist Nyari viewed the treated ones as corrupted, no longer true Nyari. They closed their borders to both humans and their changed brethren, determined to preserve what they saw as the purity of their species. 20 years after the treatment began, Minji Park attended her last public ceremony before retirement. Now 75 years old, she moved slowly with the aid of a cane. At the ceremony honoring her work, Suman, now the Nyari ambassador to Earth, presented her with their highest honor. "Dr. Park did not just save our lives," Suman said to the assembled dignitaries. "She saved our future, by reminding us that life without change is not life at all, but merely existence." Minji smiled as she accepted the award. "I only helped you remember what you had forgotten. That immortality has a price, and sometimes that price is too high." As decades passed, the differences between the two Nyari paths grew more pronounced. The treated Nyari, though still living for thousands of years, now experienced genuine growth and change. Their children, born with the new biology, developed faster and showed unprecedented creativity. The untreated Nyari remained unchanging, perfect in their immortality, but increasingly isolated from the galaxy's evolution. Some eventually reconsidered, seeking the treatment as they witnessed the renaissance among their changed brethren. 100 years after first contact, both species gathered at the United Nations in New York. The humans present were the great-grandchildren of those who had first met the Nyari. But Ambassador Suman, though now bearing the marks of a century's passage, was the same individual who had helped forge the relationship between their peoples. Humans taught us what we had forgotten, she told the assembly, her voice strong despite the century behind her. That life draws its value not from endless duration, but from change and growth. You showed us that mortality is not a weakness, but the crucible in which purpose is forged. For this wisdom, we are forever in your debt. In the audience sat Tayo, his once solid silver skin now a complex pattern of silver, gray, and white. His eyes, however, burned with a fire that had been absent for 3,000 years of his immortal existence. Beside him sat a human child, barely 10 years old, watching with wonder as the ancient alien spoke of time and change and the value of ending. In her brief life, she would experience more growth and change than a traditional Nayari would in 10,000 years. Together, their species ventured outward, each complementing the other's nature. The humans with their brief, brilliant lives full of urgent innovation, and the new Nayari with their patient wisdom tempered now by the knowledge that even for them, time was precious. They carried this truth to the stars. Immortality without change is merely existence, while a life embracing growth, even with its inevitable end, is truly living.